The year 2030 is an important one for China. China believes that this will be the year when they surpass the United States and become the world's largest economy. Yet, recent events raise doubts about this ambition. Many now question if China's dream of overtaking the US is achievable, and concerns about China's potential collapse are on the rise. As he embarks on a third term, Xi Jinping's goal is to make China a mid-level developed country in the next decade, which implies that the economy will need to expand at a rate of around 5%. But underlying trends, bad demographics, heavy debt, and declining productivity growth suggest the country's overall growth potential is about half that rate at 2.5%. The implications of China growing at 2.5% have yet to be fully digested anywhere, including Beijing. For one thing, assuming that the US grows at 1.5%, with similar rates of inflation and a stable exchange rate, China would not overtake America as the world's largest economy until 2060, if ever. Growth in the long term depends on more workers using more capital and using it more efficiently. China, with a shrinking population and declining productivity growth, has been growing by injecting more capital into the economy at an unsustainable rate. China will face a challenge in compensating for its shrinking workforce, unlike the United States, which has mechanisms in place to address this issue. Being a middle-income country with a considerably lower per capita GDP compared to developed nations like the US, China may struggle to attract immigrants who typically seek better opportunities and higher wages in other countries. China is entering a phase where its economy is expected to slow down, which is a common occurrence as economies reach higher levels of development. Currently, China's average income per person is $12,500, which is 1/5 of the income in the United States. In the past, all 38 advanced economies that exist today took several decades after World War II to surpass the $12,500 income level. Out of those 38, only 19 countries managed to grow at a rate of 2.5% or higher over the following 10 years, mainly due to an increase in the working population. On average, the number of people of working age grew by 1.2% each year. Interestingly, only two countries, Lithuania and Latvia, experienced a decline in their workforce during that period. China, however, is an exception to these trends. It is set to become the first large middle-income country to maintain a 2.5% growth in gross domestic product, GDP, despite a decrease in its working-age population, which began in 2015. This decline is quite significant and is projected to continue at a rate of nearly 0.5% annually in the coming decades. Then there's the debt. Middle-income countries with growth rates higher than 2.5% typically have an average debt of 170% of their GDP. None had debts nearly as high as China's. Before the 2008 crisis, China's debts held steady at about 150% of GDP. Afterwards, it began pumping out credit to boost growth, and debts spiked to 220% of GDP by 2015. Debt binges normally lead to a sharp slowdown, and China's economy did decelerate in the 2010s, but only from 10% to 6%, less dramatically than past patterns would predict. China avoided a deeper slowdown thanks to a tech sector boom and, more importantly, by issuing more debt. Total debt is up to 275% of GDP, and much of it funded investment in the property bubble, where all too much of it went to waste. Though capital, largely property investment, helped pump up GDP growth, productivity growth fell by half to 0.7% last decade. The efficiency of capital collapsed. China now has to invest $8 to generate $1 of GDP growth, twice the level a decade ago, and the worst of any major economy. In this situation, achieving a growth rate of 2.5% would be quite an accomplishment. However, just maintaining a basic productivity growth of 0.7% won't be enough to offset the decline in population. If China aims for a 5% GDP growth, they would need capital growth rates similar to those experienced in the 2010s. Most of the investment during that time was poured into physical infrastructure like roads, bridges, and housing. But given the scale of the housing market downturn, it's likely that overall capital growth will drop to around 2.5%. In 2014, some economists claimed that China had already become the world's largest economy when considering purchasing power parity. They believed that the value of the yuan was unfairly low and expected it to strengthen against the US dollar, thus revealing China's economic dominance. However, the Chinese currency actually lost value, and in terms of nominal figures, China's economy economy is still about a third smaller than that of the United States. Even a 2.5% growth forecast seems optimistic because it downplays the risks that could hamper China's economic expansion. These risks include escalating tensions with major trading partners, increased government intervention in the technology sector, which is a crucial part of China's productive private industry, and mounting concerns about the country's growing debt burden. China, at 2.5% growth, has major implications for its ambitions as an economic, diplomatic, and military superpower. A lesser China is more likely than the world yet realizes. So is China heading for a total collapse? Political, economic, and demographic? Conventional wisdom says no way. It boasts a massive military and an iron grip on its people and owns a whopping $870 billion in U.S. debt. What's more, American consumers are addicted to its goods. Apple makes smartphones there. Take a look at the clothes in your closet. Where are many of them made these days? Thought so. While that's no recipe for demise, some people would argue that China will soon be hanging on by a thread. That includes geopolitical analyst Peter Zayin, whose new forecast makes a case few would otherwise consider. Zayin raised eyebrows in a January interview with Joe Rogan, in which he predicted the People's Republic would collapse in 10 years. This is their last decade, Zayin said of China and its economic success. A collapse of China wouldn't necessarily be a positive outcome. It is widely recognized that such a collapse would lead to unprecedented global instability and a significant reconfiguration of the world's power dynamics. While we may be far from realizing Zayhan's prediction about the fate of the nation, considering the immense consequences involved, it is important to carefully examine the available data and facts. From multiple and significant angles, China's economy is under heavy strain. In particular, the nation experienced rare civil unrest due to its strict zero-COVID policy, which locked down vast sections of the economy, lowered industrial output, and curbed consumer spending. But once again, people who shop at Walmart and Target really enjoy buying affordable products, and they don't plan on stopping their spending in the near future. And just so you know, smartphone companies aren't going to stop manufacturing their products in China anytime soon either. Still, China's economic headwinds could lead to major impacts. Any slowdown in the Chinese economy might create new price pressures in the US if its export prices rise, and hurt the demand for US products. Coming back to the population problem, the number of older people in China is increasing rapidly, which means there are fewer working-age individuals to support them. According to the United Nations, China's population, currently around 1.4 billion, is projected to decrease to less than 800 million by the year 2100. This issue has been made worse by China's one-child policy, which was in place for over 3 decades before ending in 2016. The policy has had a negative impact on the country's long-term economic prospects. To address this, China started allowing couples to have up to 3 children in 2021, hoping it would help increase the workforce. However, it's hard to predict the actual impact this will have at the moment. China's economy also relies heavily on international trade. Exports accounted for around 20% of its gross domestic product in 2021, according to the World Bank. But trade dependence makes China vulnerable to global economic fluctuations and trade policy shifts. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed that reliance when demand for Chinese products dropped. In conclusion, China is expected to experience a growth rate of around 2.5% for the next decade, but it will gradually decline over the years. The country's massive debt and aging population pose significant challenges that will slow down China's progress. As a result, the future of China appears grim. Given the current circumstances, it seems unlikely that China will ever surpass the United States. That brings us to the end of the video. Please subscribe for more similar content and drop a like if you enjoyed the videos.